If you've got big dreams and bad genes, you are in the right place. Bromley shirts are available at barbellapparel.com. Link is in the description. I am happy to be joined today with Lucas Hatton, who is on a monster tear in the strongman scene. We're just a few weeks out from the Arnold Classic, and he's looking to do some major damage like he has done over the last couple of years in some of the biggest shows in the sport. Lucas was a football player and track athlete at Pacific Lutheran University, and within the last couple of years has won America's Strongest Man twice, taken second in North America's Strongest Man, placed third to Hooper and Hafthor in two separate competitions, and we are looking to see something big from him at the Arnold in just a few weeks. Lucas, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, man. It's been all that stuff you just said. If you would have asked me 2 years ago if that was going to happen, I would have told you hell no. So it's been quite the 18 months to 2 years, just one thing after another, and it's just excited to be here, excited to do my first Arnold Classic because I've been watching them online and on TV for years. That's just, when I'm bored, I watch this old Arnold's, old World's Strongest Man, and in a couple weeks we're going to be there.
So that kind of brings me to my first question, because I'm always interested in how the people at the top that are just in with some of the best performances the world has ever seen, how they kind of perceive themselves. So given this short run up, I mean, it was a surprise to you that you kind of leveled up as quick as you did?
Yeah, it's one of those things, like, I've worked with my coach Alec for just over 3 years at this point. And at the beginning, he was saying things like, 3 or 4 years, you'll be at the big shows. 3 or 4 years, you'll be at the big shows. And, like, I kind of believed it was possible, but I didn't really believe his timeline. I thought it might take longer than that. And it's just been, and especially, too, like a year or two ago, I missed out on a lot of opportunities. Barely missed the Arnold Classic last year. Barely missed Giants Live through OSG. So I thought for sure his timeline was wrong. We're pushed back. I missed those opportunities, and it's just been, one freak invite after another. Like, got to go to North America's, did America's Strongest Man, somehow got into Arnold UK, just one thing after another. And it just, to other people, I feel like it feels like this like rocket ship came out of nowhere. To me, it was like, oh no. We're doing it, we're failing. We're doing it, we're failing. And we're, I after the Strongest Man on Earth, I'm finally like comfortable. It's like, I'm in this pack of guys. I should be at these shows. And it took, 7 pro podiums for me to be confident to say that. But
well, I mean, 7 pro podiums. I was looking at the Strongman Archives placing, and they have like less than 10 competitions for you.
Yeah,
and it's just straight to boom, 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 where you'll get guys that'll grind for 5 or 10 years just out of the hopes that they'll get a nod as like an alternate at World's Strongest Man, or what I mean? But I understand how like being in it can kind of skew your ideas of where you're at, because especially you are the one dealing with all the setbacks and the uncertainty. But yeah, you're right. From our standpoint, it does look like a rocket ship. And I think a lot back to like watching Shaw come up. I think that's a really good example. You look at what he looked like at his first World's Strongest Man compared to even right now as he's kind of aging out. 2 different people. And it took so long to kind of get that package from, okay, I'm a threat, to like, I'm the guy, where it feels like we're getting guys showing up just like pre-cooked, ready to go at the heaviest weights and the highest level that the sport has ever seen. And it is kind of crazy to see. So on that upward trend, with your coach giving you that kind of timeline, like, I think you're going to be there, did he tell you like what it is he saw? Was it specific qualities or just kind of a number of things that tipped him off that you're going to have what it takes?
so yeah, I'm young, but I'm not as young as a lot of the guys when they first got to Worlds. Like, I'm 29, so I didn't do any pro shows until like mid year at 27, maybe even closer to 28. Like Novikov, Tom Stoltman, a lot of these guys, they were obviously Novikov's an exception, but they all were at Worlds in their early to mid 20s. I think Trey was. I think Bobby was 26 when he did his first Arnold. So they all beat me to it. Alec got a hold of me after I'd done, 10, 12 years of football and track, 3 years of Olympic weightlifting, 3 or 4 years of powerlifting, 3 or 4 different coaches. Just basically, he's like, you have 10 to 15 years of just GPP built up, and you're well-rounded and athletic. You don't really have any huge holes aside from your deadlift, and can't throw a sandbag for shit. But um, so it was just like the base is built about as wide as it can go. So if you just go all in, we don't have to spend time building a base. We just have to build a strongman. And I think that base that we built prior to strongman is the thing that like I can just lean into, and in certain events it's just free points.
There's a really big trend in the sport. I mean, if you do a little bit of digging into like who the greats have been up until now and what they've done, of guys having a background very much like you did. I brought this up with Hooper when I talked to him because he has a similar like kind of wide athletic background, dabbling in all kinds of shit. But you look at like Bruce Wilhelm and Don Reinhardt, and even Kaz, like the first really strong guys in the sport, and nobody knew what the hell they were doing, but they all came in with just as wide. I mean, from wrestling to track and field and so on, and then we see a bit of that, but as sports get bigger, you get a lot more specialization. So you do see guys that specialize very early, manage to get very good. And there seems to be this thing where guys like Novikov or Stoltman, and I think of like a lot of the guys that level up super quick seem to hit a pretty hard plateau. Like I think a lot of viewers think that they're just going to be on this upward trend forever. You see the 22-year-old, it's like he's going to be unstoppable. And it seems like a lot of guys will exist for 5 or 6 years, not really doing anything, not really improving. Do you notice that at all? And do you think that is a byproduct of that kind of training priority of like GPP versus specialized training?
Yeah, and aside from like, I'm trying to think of guys who were world class before 25 that were also world class after 30. And aside from Thor, and Z, there's almost no one. So, I mean, I think people see that, and a lot of guys think, okay, well, they did it. They competed in strongman, 5, 10 times a year. Zadrunas much more for a decade and a half, 2 decades. In Zadrunas' case, 2.5 to 3 decades. And I think they're just like, that's the model to being good. I think JF Corona is another example of like huge longevity, tons of competing. And I think people that's a fallacy. They think they're on the genetic level with those people. And I think those guys are the exception, not the rule. Getting ridiculously good at strongman really, really early is probably not the way to be a strongman for a really long time. I think those guys are just a huge exception. I mean, just building up connective tissue, variety of skills, variety of technique. How many of those guys did the same dumb techniques and events? Even those 3 guys I mentioned, from the beginning of their career to the end. Like, not a huge amount of adaptability from a lot of the old school guys that competed forever. So I don't know. I think guys look up to those guys as they should, but they draw the wrong conclusions on their career.
I think that is dead on, and I think that's a trend that a lot of people, that's a habit a lot of people fall into. It's like, well, if you can't take rules from the best performers to figure out what the best way to do it is, and what are we going to do? Take rules from like the mid guys or whatever? But that's true. The sport selects for the guys that are best suited. I mean, Olympic lifting is the same. You have certain schools that just took a bunch of people and threw them against the wall, and the ones that lived, it's like, well, there's your world champions. But that's a lot different than saying, for you, we're going to figure out how to get the most out of you, given your talents. And I'm thinking of guys like, I got into the sport back when like Kevin Nee was a big thing, and he amounted to, he's like 21 or something. He amounted to nothing. Errol Haugen was another one. There's a bunch of guys that were really young, bright futures, and then kind of fizzled. It brings up a question of durability. And I think which obviously has a genetic component, but obviously there's a lot you can do to keep yourself from getting just chewed up. But I imagine guys hitting this upward, it's like, oh, I just got this good doing whatever. But now it's like the recovery is so razor thin because you're chasing the biggest weights. You're so desperate to get that last bit of improvement to get that next quantum leap. But then recovery doesn't happen quite as easily. This is a very broad question, but like from the 30,000 foot view, like how do you kind of approach that paradox of having to chase the biggest weights in order to be the guy to beat over so many different events while not just getting your ass chewed up and being riddled with pain and scar tissue and inflammation?
I think it's being a very. I mean, it's kind of funny at the Vegas the Vegas Deadlift Championships. I was there as a fan, and I got interviewed by Colin Bryce in between events because he saw I was there, and he kind of gave me a hard time for being a selective fighter because I've turned down shows. He's like, "Oh, you just turned down fights." He would just give me a hard time, but I 100% do. I I think a lot of guys they're so focused on like, okay, I'm gonna do. There's these OSG shows. There's a Shaw Open. There's the Arnold Amateur. There's OSG. There's tons of things to do. Maybe an SCL. All of these come with invites to the next thing, and they put no thought into, oh shit, I need to be ready to do the next thing when I get there. It's like you can qualify for the Arnold Classic, but if you're not ready to pull 950, you're going to get ninth in the deadlift. If a 400-pound log is something you have to peak for, guess what? You're not ready for the Arnold Classic, right? Like I would rather pull the punches and say, okay, I'm only going to peak 3 or 4 times a year. I'm going to do proper preps, long cycles of training, 12 to 16 weeks with a plan. Because it's like the strongman I was 2 years ago, I was good at, I probably could have won the Arnold Amateur. I almost did, but I wasn't the strongman that was ready to do the Arnold Classic. And if I would have done 15 shows between then and now, I still wouldn't be the strongman ready to do the Arnold Classic. So it's just, I don't think I've even competed. I've been competing since 2018, and I don't think I've competed 20 times yet. Like, and there's guys that compete 20 times in 2 years. Like,
And that's
you're not.
refreshing to hear
Yep.
because there is this culture, and it's not everybody, but where it is, it's very strong. There's this culture of just getting in gamer mode and be ready for anything. I actually heard it recently. I was listening to Lynn Morehouse and James Diefenbaugh on a podcast because they had kind of the Strongman Corp takeover, and they're doing some stuff with OSG, and they're talking about things coming up. But Lynn said something that I'm sure is directly in line with the way Colin Bryce feels. Something to the effect that, well, you can't be a strongman in this era and peak for every single show. You got to be ready for anything. I guess the assumption being that so many people are competing that they have their pick of athletes that are good to go at any given time. And that rubbed me the wrong way. And I understand from their perspective what they're doing is people that are trying to run this business and grow it and are doing a pretty good job. But from an athlete's perspective, and I'm nowhere near the level you're at, but I have a good 20 years of wearing the shit out of my body for, plastic trophies. And to hear that the best guys in the world are held to that standard, especially with the pay being what it is and that, the obligation kind of seems to go one way. I was just thinking of like, do you value longevity in your athletes? Because that seems like the most guaranteed way to get guys to overreach, to become unprepared, to get worse performances in shows, probably, and to just have a higher rate of burnout. So to hear somebody kind of reject that and say, I'm going to do the thing that's going to like guarantee I can do this the longest. I mean, it's very refreshing to hear, especially given how many other strongmen I've heard try to kind of do the try hard thing that it's like, well, I got to be ready for anything, brother.
Yeah, it's like if something's tweaked, I'm not like because it's crazy. I mean, I turned down World's Strongest Man last year. It
I
was
didn't know
because of
that.
scheduling conflict, not because of anything else. Like, so I run a pro am on the West Coast called Rainier Classic. It's the longest running pro am for Strongman Corp, and we had something like 100 plus athletes that were flying out to come do the show, whether it was amateurs or pros. And I'm like the guy that runs our contest. I'm a logistics guy on our team. And it's the same weekend as World's Strongest Man. I scheduled it like that because at the time when we scheduled it, I thought there's no chance of going to Worlds. I got like a really late reserve invite, and I said no. And I think I've heard from like 15 different, like a bunch of people that that's crazy that I said no to Worlds. I was like, no. I mean, if you actually trust that you're good enough to go to Worlds next year, you can say no if you got a bicep tweak or a life or like. They're so afraid to say no, and it's like there might be a year where, like I have like something's tweaked, and a lot of guys will just go to the show and get 12th. I mean, I'd rather respectfully as a professional athlete say no than limp my way through the show and put on a bad show and then steal a spot from some kid who's upcoming, right? Like I trust the fact that I can rehab whatever's going on and be prepared to do it the following year. Or if I have to requalify, I'll go do it. I don't know. Guys are so afraid to really bet. That's really betting on yourself. Saying yes to everything is not betting on yourself.
Yeah, it seems like a very reactive decision, which I
Hmm.
get, given how it's like that's the thing to be able to say, oh, I made it to Worlds and to have that opportunity and pass it up. But I think it also speaks to like the security you have in your ability, the fact that you are as good as you
Hmm.
are, because there probably is a lot of doubt in the heads of athletes that like, anything could happen. I could get injured next year. Maybe I am about as good as I can be and I'm going to get edged out next year. But that kind of reactive decision making, I mean, it doesn't do anything good. Like you said, you're going to put up a shitty performance. You're going to increase the likelihood that you're going to F yourself up. And it's like, what's that going to do for the rest of your career? I mean, I had a really bad peak just a few months ago at OSG, one of the worst I've ever had because I tried to do too much too soon for a show I wasn't ready for. And even
Yeah.
all the experience I have with these events at these weights that I've always been confident in, I got chewed up and spit out in a way I've never felt before. And again, you take that and you multiply it by 20, 30, 40%, however much heavier the weights are that you guys are using. And it's like, I couldn't imagine anybody going in
Hmm.
and having a great time doing that. So have you yourself had any like really big setbacks or injuries, things you really had to take time away from to kind of smooth out to get ready?
Not not a huge amount. So what kind of started this pull my punches conversation with Worlds is it was so 2023. We just relocated my gym Dungeon Strength into a bigger gym. We were financially very, very tight. I quit my job like 18 months ago to go all in on strongman and coaching and running the gym. So anyone who's ever done something like that, you know how broke you get really fast. And I had just done North America's Strongest Man. That went great. And I was like, I'm going to do OSG. Um, because that comes with the auto invite. I'm not going to do America's Strongest Man. And I got close to America's Strongest Man and I found like, I have no money. And America's Strongest Man's paying $25,000. OSG's paying nothing. So I took the risk. I did America's Strongest. I won. But in that process, I tweaked my bicep a bit and I had to pull. I probably could have done OSG, but I had the invite to Arnold UK now. I had to pull that punch and say, I'm going to rehab this bicep. I probably would have been fine, but I think most guys would have gone. Um, and it's just little stuff like that. Like I don't, I've, because I compete so infrequently, I have tons of time to get the body fixed. Um, but even up until Strongest Man on Earth, that bicep was a problem, and I had to be conscious of it the whole time. During the axle, like the axle log ladder, every axle was like considering, should I do this? Because it's probably going to come off, and it didn't, thankfully. And now, honestly, with this Arnold prep, biceps couldn't be better. Knock on wood. But really, just standard strongman. So just biceps. I've pushed the back pretty close to too far before, but nothing that was more than like 2 or 3 weeks of like major setback. But the strategy we've been doing, no major tears, nothing. So I think we're on to something.
So from the kind of macroscopic perspective, because you talked at the beginning about this wide base you have from all the years of doing all these different
Hmm.
things, and it seems like the assumption is the wider the base, the higher that peak can go,
Hmm.
and the more you can focus on specialization. It seems like all the different approaches to programming try to solve that problem in different ways, whether you're always just concurrently working on GPP into forever while simultaneously specializing, or if you segment them off. Is it safe to say that your normal training cycles kind of follow that kind of like wide to narrow approach when you're looking
Hmm.
at like shorter durations?
Yeah, like we uh, especially Alec having his background in weightlifting, and I'm still a somewhat functional weightlifter. I can't clean because my front rack's gone. But basically, up until like 10 to 12 weeks out, we're doing weightlifting movements, not strongman movements. I'm just squatting and deadlifting. I'm sprinting. I'm jumping. I'm, as general as possible. And even in prep, there's certain events that I just don't train. Like yoke for American Strongest Man, I did 2 yoke sessions. I just need to, I think just based on the phase of your career, I think, StrongerMan put out a really good video about this, about the amount you should do events based on the phase of your career. Um, and what he said is pretty close to how we feel about it. There's certain events where I just pull back. I just need to be generally good at pressing, generally fast, generally healthy. Um, and then when we do apply it to things like the Arnold Classic, like yesterday I did a training session where I did half the Arnold Classic at comp weight, and I'm fine, right? But I haven't been doing events for 12 weeks. I've been doing events for 4 weeks or 5 weeks. You know what I mean? It's just different strategy. Like there's only so much yoke training you can do, and I don't do a lot, and I'm going to keep getting better at yoke. So,
And that makes perfect sense conceptually. Where I have always struggled is because you have to be very cognizant of what your time to detrain certain events is and which ones aren't going to detrain. I mean, like I know for me and for people I've trained as well, if I'm just strong, like if my basic lifts are good, there's certain events it's like I'm gonna be able to do that. It's like riding a bike. But then it's like, okay, well, I have to make sure I'm as strong as I was last time I was good at it. And then there's the other events where it's like, okay, if I didn't have 5 weeks to do this, I'm going to suck at it.
Yep.
Funnily enough, yoke is one of those for me, which you would think is like the most low tech thing you can do. It's like I have to drill the shit out of it. If I go 6 months, it's like, anyways. So it seems very like simple in practice. But there are these like different variables that bleed into it. Would you say that there's a lot of personalization that goes on to that approach with like you and the things that you tend to excel at or retain longer?
Yeah, and I think that's the one of the biggest jobs of a coach, is, and honestly, it's the big skill of Alec. Yes, he understands, the sports science, progressions, all that stuff. But it's like if you in the first year to 18 months with an athlete can determine the max recoverable volume of all of these major categories of things, you've solved the puzzle of like what to write in a 12-week block. Like we've done a bit of trial and error, usually erring on the side of doing less than more. We've gone too far a few times on certain events. But I could pretty much tell you if you gave me a set of 6 hypothetical events and you give me 10 to 12 weeks, I could probably write nearly the same program that Alec will write without being in the same room. Because but that's what 3.5 years of paying attention does. And I think a lot of people are writing programs and training, but they're not paying attention. Or they've had maybe 4 log preps that haven't gone that well, and they're going to do their next log prep pretty much the same because that's how you peak for a log, right? It's just, we just been paying attention and adjusting, And, I would look for inspiration. Like people look at, it's weird in strongman. They look at me and then they're like, I need to ask Lucas about how to train. I was like, I don't train me. I have a coach, right? They don't ask the coach. And in strongman, people put a lot, like they think the good strongman is the good programmer, the good technician, the good whatever. And they probably are, but they don't look to like, who's the coach? Right. And in weightlifting, it's the complete opposite. It's like, who's your coach? What's the system? And, I don't know. It's kind of backwards in strongman, but I think like professional coaches in strongman are kind of a new thing in the last, 5 years, 10 years.
That's true, actually, now that I think about it, because for the longest time, strongman was very much like an individual thing. It's like it doesn't pay anything. You have to do it on top of your regular job. And it's like, who can afford a coach? But now it has exploded. I mean, I feel like every person I ever talked to is being coached by Laws. And, there's Alec and there's a couple guys they're a staple in the field now with their coaching. And that's something that blows my mind too. And it's almost like I almost want to hire them just to see how they go about it. Because I ran a gym for 6 years. It was primarily focused towards strongman. I coached a bunch of people in person. I loved it. And it's like everything about training somebody in person kind of goes away when you're doing it online. I know Alec trains you in person, I believe, but you get a lot of online coaches. They're very good. They have a lot of good athletes. And I'm just like, what are the overarching principles that allow you to work so well with so many people from a distance? Because it feels like pure personalization is like the only way that you'd be able to get somebody to find that fine balance of stress versus recovery, given all the shit that you have to program for and anticipate.
Well, and what's interesting though is like, um, yes, there's a lot of specialization, um, but a couple things I think are true. A good idea is a good idea. Like a good system. There's nothing wrong saying that. Yes, there's a lot of specialization, but I don't think there's anything wrong with having a system and being a systems-based coach and like trusting that system. Because I think I'm basically doing the exact same prep as Inez. She is posting a session. It's like that's what I have today. She's 3 hours ahead in Chicago. Like, but
Wow.
there's certain things where she can handle more volume than me. I can handle less, or she trains the event a little different. Um, but squat deadlift, we're peaking exactly the same. And it's a progression that Alec likes for most of the athletes, right? Unless proven otherwise, right? So there's definitely a core system that's kind of believed in for athletes of, on this tier or this tier or this tier, where they're at in their career. And then there's the hyper specialization of like, okay, if you gave me the same amount of this that Inez does, I'll explode because she's just way can recover way better than me, and my absolute loads are higher, right? But still, like systematically, we have almost the same block, but we found that it's still working for both of us, so we're not going to change it. I think I've run the same squat deadlift progression for 8 different shows.
Wow.
8 shows, we've done the same. I'd have to look back. I think it's all 7 of those shows that I podiumed in, plus the Arnold Amateur or the Amateur Nationals prior to that, we ran the same squat deadlift progression.
Ever find yourself confused by the complexity of programming? I know I struggled like crazy in my early strongman career. There was just too much advice, and every decision I made felt like a guess. As soon as I hit a snag in any program, I would have no idea what to do, so I would inevitably bail. It took me years of training and coaching to figure out how to predictably increase muscle and strength, both in myself and others. And those lessons took me to my own showings in World's Strongest Man, America's Strongest Man, and the Arnold in the 231-pound weight class. This is why we made BaseStrength AI, to give clear, direct, and personalized instruction right in the middle of your workout in real time. BaseStrength AI features 3 programs: Block, 70s Powerlifter, and Bullmastiff, each one inspired by the work ethic and programming of the biggest and strongest bodybuilders, powerlifters, and strongmen throughout history. These templates originated in my book Base Strength, and they can be ran as is, but with BaseStrength AI, weight and volume are prescribed to you on your specific feedback, and that's personalization that even an online coach can't replicate. This gives you the absolute certainty that every rep is meaningful, that every block of training is getting you closer to your goals. It's my programming, but it's your program. Get the heart of old school training with the intelligence of a coach right in your back pocket. Head now to basestrength.com. So something I want to drill down on, because I think this might be obvious to you guys, but maybe not to a lot of the viewers or a lot of the fans
Sure.
of the sport. And given that your coach has an Olympic lifting background, this is kind of how these sports systems tend to operate. So it looks like in that vein, you have this arrangement of events or things that might help the events, and it seems to be the focus is on primarily the amount of work that you're doing, and that's the main thing that you manipulate. I would guess that you probably routinely stay pretty far away from maximum efforts or from
Mm-hmm.
failure or from anything that looks like technical breakdown.
Yeah, like just kind of by design, like the the way I like to describe it to my clients and whatever is the more macro the movement is, the more meat and potatoes the movement is, the more calculated you need to be, the more, okay, this is going to take 3 years to progress, right? So that's your timeline. You need to be really aware of when to fly close to the sun, when to not, when to pull back. Really listen to what the coach says and what's on the sheet. But as you get farther down the program towards your accessories and those kind of things, go watch the biggest bodybuilder in the gym. How is he doing it? You need to learn how to do your tricep pushdowns like him, right? And on the opposite end, prior to your squats and deadlifts and big movements, your sprints and plyos and stuff, how's the track athlete doing that? Like, look at the intention, look at the intensity, look at the rest times, those kinds of things. It's just understanding that different parts of your workout sheet require different intention and like a different just whole mindset. It's like, where is it, appropriate to put the pedal to the floor, and where is it appropriate to, let's do this, maybe some of this, and I think a lot of people think to get strong, they put the pedal to the floor on the meat and potatoes lifts. And it's like, if I did that, I would die.
That word intention, that's so big because,
Yeah.
I mean, as overwhelming as it is when you do start lifting, and especially since
Mm-hmm.
most people get into it, not as part of a group or some team or something, they do it by themselves, they have to learn by themselves. I don't know that it's better with the internet than it was when I started, when it was just shitty advice at a 24-hour fitness, because there's just so much and none of it seems to connect. And in just kind of going over like the last century and a half of like training and how it's evolved, it seems like there is this kind of hard separation between what became like bodybuilding culture and what became like Olympic lifting, which is essentially it's like track and sports performance applied to a barbell.
Yeah.
And the intent is very different because bodybuilders get big and strong, and eventually powerlifters spawned off of, I think, bodybuilding a bit more. Were influenced by that kind of Western mindset of just going scorched earth every time you go into the gym, and you're just horse cocking big weights, or you're taking everything to failure. It's exhaustion, because that is such a powerful driver of progress, but it also very, very quickly becomes unsustainable, especially if you're trying to juggle it with a bunch of different shit.
Mm-hmm.
And then people don't anticipate that, oh, hey, I'm a lot stronger than I was a few years ago. My ability to recover from those loads is not the same as it was back then.
Mm-hmm.
So it is interesting to hear that actually laid out in a very specific way by somebody who not only is like kind of dabbling in those different intentions, but is very aware and deliberate of it, because I think that goes over so many people's head. Like, it doesn't make sense how I remember being a teenager and trying to run through my first like periodized program. It didn't make sense how I could do sets that weren't to failure. It's like, this feels like I'm not doing anything. This is stupid. I'm going to go, puke from a 20 repper or something. It's just, that's something I really like to convey to the people out there. And as a quick aside, I mean, you mentioned not having money in the sport. Anybody who's watching this, go and follow Lucas's YouTube channel. You're at, I think, 4,000 subs now, so you're monetized, which means you can earn income from ad revenue. I was turned on to you from Sam Sheether about a year ago. He told me to check you out because of the way you approach training. And in watching some of your videos in prep for this, I was really impressed by the density of stuff, because between you giving your explanation for what you're doing and Alec kind of filling stuff in, just over like 12 or 15 videos I watched, I mean, there's a lot of dense info relative to most training stuff. So I just want to say, like, well done on putting that together, because there's a lot of value in there. I recommend everybody go check that out.
Yeah, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun doing that. We are monetized now. It's still less money than I'm paying my videographer,
Yeah.
but that's what write-offs are for. But I think we'll get there. I've really enjoyed it, and I think along the way, like, a lot of channels lose the, they stop doing training, they stop doing concepts, they start, because it's hard to grow YouTube big like that. And I know there's some things I need to change and things I need to do to grow YouTube, but I don't think I ever want to lose the training vlogs and the technique, because honestly, that's what people are starting to look to me for. And that's how I feel like I can be the most impactful beyond just competing, is like, let's learn how to do these events well. Let's learn a thing or two about, training concepts and all that stuff. And you know what? If some of the guys I'm competing with pick up a thing or two, whatever. It's not the end of the world. At the end of the day, all the ships rise, and I think a lot of guys keep everything so close to the chest because they're like, I can't let anyone learn anything that I'm doing. I'm just like, at the end of the day, man, like, they're gonna see you do it at the show. The next time you do it, they're gonna change their technique if they're smart. So it's like, I get why people would be so secretive with their training concepts. But at the end of the day, like, this sport's got to grow, and Hooper's probably already watched every video in the world, and he's already figured out how to do the technique. So share your technique. Those amateurs need to learn it.
Yeah, if your success rides on somebody else not finding out, like, how you set up your feet in a farmer's walk at the start or something, it's like you're probably not as positioned to dominate as you'd like to be. But just as a quick aside, I jump on this every chance I can get because there's two things I know anything about. One of them is lifting, the other one is YouTube, and I don't get to talk to anybody about YouTube. So
Sure.
whenever somebody talks about that, it's like my ears perk up. But just like a little bit of advice to you from what I went through, because I know it's like daunting. Like, how do I make this grow? How do I make it profitable?
Sure.
My channel, I had a lot of success in the beginning just doing basic ass unedited whiteboard shit, and I deviated from that because I had this idea that if I did a lot more and really started to focus on topics and optimizing and editing and blah, 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 that it would grow. And there's examples of that where it did if I do a very, very, very specific thing. But because I keep bouncing around or whatever, like I never settle on one thing. I'm eternally
Sure.
spiraling off to try other things. So there's mixed results. But I know exactly what does the best. And it's one of two things. It's either a hyper edited 45-minute video essay that I scripted ahead of time and had a jump cut every 1.5 seconds, or it's me in front of a goddamn whiteboard just saying this topic, this is what we're doing today. And I would imagine that your channel would do the absolute best. You seem like a strongman John Meadows. Like if you look at John Meadows' channel, he had an immense amount of success and it was training stuff. The only tweak you got to make is make the information discoverable, because if it's hidden behind a vlog, that's a different search, that's a different engagement people see on their feed. They're great, they're really great, but there's so much and you could probably take long form stuff you have and chop it up into 4 or 5 minutes, like, oh, in this section, whatever. But I think you could have an absolutely huge channel and you don't have to sell out to any of the stupid shit or do any of the gimmicky shit that I've tried over the years. And people would learn and you would be able to maintain the integrity and also be able to grow. But I absolutely think you should drill down. All you got to do is just say, instead of, hey, this is training vlog number 37, just say, this is how you get triceps the size of a fucking golden retriever. And then, it's
Sure.
It's the same info. It's just presented differently. But no, it's going to be really interesting to see you grow that, because there are so many people that aren't quite as transparent, or if they do content, it's either dry. I mean, we get to see you kind of dicking around. We get to see you talking shit. We get to see your full warm-up stuff. Anyways, that's my 2 cents, just from the little bit I engaged with that. It was really cool.
And I think there's a bit of a hole in strongman YouTube right now of like how many people learned strongman events from like Alan Thrall. Like, it's the old untamed strength stuff, right?
Yeah.
And he's still doing it, but not quite as much. There's nobody that's just going deep on like, how the hell do I do strongman? There's a couple, but they're not gaining a ton of traction. Like, you're definitely, I'll take a lot of that and use that. I need it. I get caught up in my own ways a little bit, and like my own ways obviously aren't growing things super fast. So, we'll try some stuff. A lot of people early on, I did like just straight up technique tips videos, and the amount of people still in the comments. I think it's been 8 months since I made one. And they're like, "When's technique tips coming back? When's technique tips coming back?" So I think just dive in, just education, start teaching, because I enjoy it. It's what I do all day at the gym. It's just it's a good time. So
yeah, and when you can take that and make it like the thing that earns you money, it's like the best thing in the world, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is my passion, it's what I know about, but also it's what people are here for. And it's like, you might do the stone technique that appeals to 10% of your audience, but then you do a squat tutorial. Let's talk about that. Squatting, that just popped into my head. God damn it, the 600 for 20. I don't think I've gotten as excited to watch a lift in like 10 years. I was getting like Ronnie in his prime throwback vibes. 20 reppers have a staple in lifting culture. I mean, squatting does in general, but you go back to super squats, anything that causes pain, nausea, vomiting, whatever people associate that with. So in addition to 1 rep max, it feels like a 20 repper has always been this thing that people have followed. And I remember hearing a long time ago, like, man, if you can hit 500 for 20, you're just cock strong. That's like world class, whatever. And I remember following people and some of the biggest things you've seen from the craziest squatters. And I always thought, like, can somebody pull off a 600 by 20? Is that a thing that can be done? And watching you do it, not only do it, but do it in like the most casual style. You like pulsed your first like 13 reps. It looked so comfortable. It looked like you had a 650 for 20. Was that something that you prepared for specifically, or do you just stay in that good a shape where it's like on a one-off you can kind of go throw that out?
So I have the longest torso on the planet and the shortest legs on the planet. So I'm built to squat. I understand that I'm squatting on easy mode, but for me, given that, all of my strongman movements, if my squat is peaked, everything is peaked, right? And for me, with things like squatting or whatever, to actually get fatigue in the quads and build the quads, I never get that. I mean, during shop prep, I did my top set was like 750 by 8, and my mid back was what was sore. It wasn't my legs,
Yeah.
right? Like I don't get leg stimulus just because of how I'm built, and like I've just my legs, abductors, all that stuff has always been way ahead of my back and my hips and all that stuff. So this off season, we're coming into the Arnold Classic. There's things like the Wheel of Pain. There's maybe going to be a max overhead. There's all kinds of things that are going to require my quads and my legs to just be stronger than they are now. And my deadlift style that we've switched to, as my legs peak, my deadlift peaks. Somewhat obvious there, but everything's based around my squat. And this off season, we're like, okay, it's really hard to get stimulus out of your quads to really grow your quads. So we spent a whole off season doing pause 10s and 20s and 40 rep leg presses and Bulgarian split squats and stuff like that. And the culmination of all that at the end of it, like 8 to 12, I think it was like a 10 to 12 week phase, was that 600 by 20. And it's like, did we care if we would hit 600 by 20? No. We cared about growing the quads and getting the legs as much hypertrophy and as strong and as big as they've ever been. And we definitely did that. I mean, my squat is so much stronger than it was for shop prep. And, we did 10s and 20s to do it. So that's kind of a cool roundabout thing. I've never squatted over 800, funny enough. But if you asked me to squat 950 like 8 weeks from now, I wouldn't even be scared about it. Like we're
Really?
building the squat base wide, and during the off season, like we just went wider, that set was exceptionally wide, you know. Um,
That's, and I always end up coming way back to like this, global view where everything gets super, super broad and all encompassing, because there's these like hard philosophical questions about training that nobody's really answered, but you can see people approaching it different ways. So let's take that for instance. You feel confident that staying so submax and benefiting so much from reps and volume that you could actually prep and hit this really big single, even though we're talking about, loads that are 10, 15% above what you've ever hit. I'm reminded Chad Wesley Smith, I think, was very similar. He would, and you see that in his programming, he would when he attempted his 990 squat, I think he said like his last squat in training was, less than 100 pounds below that.
mhm.
And it makes me wonder if, okay, is that a byproduct of like your leverages because of the way you're built, how comfortable you are, that you have this in the tank and it doesn't require as much technical preparation and slowly kind of easing into these big weights, or if it is just a byproduct of having just such a big base from all this work that you have that much in reserve.
Well, okay, so to be completely fair, that statement of if I had to squat 950 in 8 weeks, in those 8 weeks, I would bridge the gap between 800 and
Sure.
950.
Yeah.
Maybe that last squat is 890 or it's 900, and then on the day we trust that we have it. Um, but yeah, I think the more so the reason I'm so much into like that wide base building is how many strongmen know their max and everything. That's really stupid, especially as you get stronger, right? Like I don't know my max in a lot of things, or I can make safe assumptions that it's higher than what I know, but they want to find out all the time, and that urge to find out is ruining your training, right? Like I'm not eager to find out. I'm just eager to, is my 20 rep going up? Is my 10 rep going up? Is my 8 rep going up? Is my, maybe I did the same weight on this, front squat progression we do, but I paused it better, paused it longer, right? Like there's so many ways to like, aside from that maximal number going up. And I think especially with guys being as competitive as we are, we love that maximal number. And it's just like when you start to love all of the other, mobility, range of motion, all those things getting better, you can say things like, my max has gone up, I just haven't done it. And I will hit it and I can call my shot and do it. But it's just like people won't step back for like 18 months. There's so many strong. You see it. My main one that I harp on is like overhead. If guys took like 18 months to step back and rebuild their technique and their like training system around overhead, they'd kill me. But they're not gonna. So like, there's
It's
tons of
like
guys that are way more powerful than me.
Well, I saw you throw
Well,
that
there's a couple.
550 by the neck, so you're being a little humble here, but
Yeah.
no, but I understand what you mean. I mean, there's like there's guys that are very explosive that have the ability to funnel that immense power, but it's like, okay, will they? Will they do everything they need to?
Hmm.
Um, Geez, so it's like Goodhart's law, if I said that correctly. When something is held up as the metric by which you assign value, it
Hmm.
suddenly becomes a shitty metric because everybody starts focusing on that for the sake of it. And you start losing other important things that you kind of
Hmm.
took for granted, assuming would just be part of it. So everybody, and I think it goes back to the way that people start training. People start training by maxing their deadlift weekly. Oh, I got stronger. You get the guys that survive
Hmm.
that, and that's all they know. Next thing you know, that they're getting ready for a big pro-am or to get their pro card or something, and everything is just heavy, heavy, heavy all the way up. And as you start to chase that, everything that you associated with that kind of falls to the
Hmm.
wayside. So it really is a skill to be able to understand all the other gears that kind of move around and influence that, and also have the presence of mind, the patience, the foresight to be able to stay away and focus on those things, trusting that it'll pay off. But it's like there's so many steps in between that base building. I mean, I see how people get anxious or scared. Like, if
Hmm.
I'm going to stay in this realm over here, it's like, God, I'm going to lose. I'm going to have to like recondition to the weight, or it's going to feel heavier. I'm not really getting stronger. It's not specific. And one of the reasons I'm really excited about this conversation is it seems to throw a little bit of dirt in the eye in the obsessive hyper specialization that seems to be, and it's not just the common man doing it, it seems to be reiterated in a lot of more like higher brow platforms where
Hmm.
people feel like, well, if I'm not doing singles, doubles, triples, whatever, if I'm not 85% up, if I'm not doing this, that, or the other thing, that I'm going to be losing a step. And in reality, it's like
Hmm.
you do have so much room. In fact, you're best off if you are avoiding the thing that seems obvious to get to that next
Yeah.
step.
Yeah. And another perspective, not just on the lifts, but it somewhat speaks to the pacing of my career as well. People are frustrated with their rate of progression because they pick a show, and then there's this artificial 10 to 12 week window between you and the show, and they think I have to reach these numbers by this show. But if they just had someone in their ear saying the real finish line is 2 years post that show, you're only frustrated because a promoter said that you need to deadlift 650 for reps 8 weeks from now. But like, you're totally capable of deadlifting 650 reps 6 months from now, and that's a completely fine, awesome rate of progression if you just broke it down by percentage or like what's normal, where you're at in your career. But all these guys competing all the time, and especially I think the men compete too high. There's guys that are like really good amateurs that would maybe get 10 to 15th at amateur nationals going to Shaw Open. For what? Of
Yeah.
course you feel like you suck and you're out of time. You're at a show that's 2 years too far ahead of you. Go to amateur nationals, get 15th, learn from it. Go next year, get fifth. Go the next year, win, and then go to Shaw Amateur. If you're not 100% sure that you could call your shot at like an amateur nationals, like I'm going to win with events that aren't great for me, you're not ready to win the Shaw Amateur or the Arnold Amateur or OSG, because let's say on some freak chance you get through, you're screwed. Like, if you can't for sure win amateur nationals, good luck at strongest man on earth. Like,
Yeah, and we can see that in I think that's a sign of the rate of progression of the sport. I mean, since my first
mhm.
contest was back in like 2006, there wasn't even a women's division. I competed with Kristen Rhodes when she had to go heads up with the guys because there was a, you know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah, yeah.
to see how much the sport has grown since then, and now we get this freak talent pool, and it's so much bigger, and the talent's better, and the weights are going up, but the truth is, if you can have this talent pool that's predicated off of that, what you just described, so many people that don't have the foresight, that don't have the system, that aren't training as intelligently, that tells you how much more things have to go. Because if you take the current talent pool and have them apply that, all of a sudden, over a long period of time, you get more longevity, but you're also getting higher numbers, which means like we're not done yet, and that's
Yeah.
kind of a scary thing to think about when I put it in that perspective.
Yeah. It's like, um, I think Hooper's done a couple interesting videos on this, and he reached on a couple points, but it's just like where could world records go in certain lifts? We're so like it's we have world records in strongman done with absurdly awful technique. Like like if you look at what the 80 kilo men are doing or the 64 kilo women, that technique proficiency and perfection compared to the open men. Like if the open men were as smart at training as some of the smaller people in our sport, I think guys like Cooper are 100% right. The world records are nowhere close to what they should be. It's just yeah, and just that. I mean, to be fair, we're making crazy progress. Like how how cool was a 400-pound log like 4 years ago? How many amateurs can do a 400-pound log now? There's a lot. Like it's not even a big deal to hit a 400-pound log anymore. So I think the average is improving a ton. But to your point, there's so much further to go. So the freakiness of what that average, good amateur is going to be a couple years from now, I'm excited to see because it's. I mean, if you fight through the right path, I'm a little biased to the path I took, but like you fight through like one of those, chip away, different shows, the right shows. When you finally get through, it's not that weird to be ready to be good at Worlds or good at the Arnold or good at these shows because the average of the people at those shows is going up. And if you can just chip away at the people that are at your level and just take 4 years to do it instead of 18 months, I think you're going to be pretty surprised where you end up.
Let's talk about leverages really quick because my ears really perked up when you were talking about your squat build. I have essentially the same build.
Yeah.
It's not just short legs; it's specifically short femurs. Where if I get in a
Yes.
leg press, my knees end up like below my below my sternum.
Yes.
It's like some type of like hand puppet with like little legs. That's what I feel like when I lift. And similarly, I related to early on if like I came in with a good front squat or if I came in with like, I felt really good off a box or something. It was like stone loading, picks, log cleans, like everything just felt great.
Hmm.
Whereas if I paid a lot of time and attention to deadlifting, I might get my deadlift up a little bit, but I'd be fatigued and kind of shitty and the movement patterns wouldn't really carry over. I'm really interested given that, and it's weird to call your deadlift mid. I mean, you just
Yeah,
doubled an
it is.
880 deadlift, but that's where we're
Hmm.
at now, right? So,
Yeah.
given that disparity, and like that's the thing that you have to focus on in order to be the guy to beat, and that works so hard against your leverages and the way you're built.
Hmm.
What specific tactics are you employing to try to get that on the fast track, or is it just something where you're just letting everything grow at its rate and stay in the course?
So I mentioned that squat deadlift progression that we've been doing. Um, we found systemically what works, right? Like I know that if I need to have my deadlift at a all-time high 12 weeks from now, I understand how to do that at least systemically, right? Um, but given I just don't have great leverages. I have to be absolutely perfect technically, and I'm still not even close to there yet. Like I could still pick apart a few things, but it's like okay, I know that my legs are my strong suit. I found a way to make my deadlift a little squattier. My torso is really long. I had to focus on things like seated good mornings for like 18 months so that my mid back would not fold over when it gets heavy because my that lever is just long. I pause all of my rows. Like I train. My back has to be so much better than somebody else at holding positions because it's 6 inches longer. Like when I sit on an airplane, I'm the tallest person sitting down. I'm
Yeah.
barely 6 foot tall, right? So it's just like being really intentional about the back being so bulletproof to like not necessarily move weight, but to stay in position. And then finding a way to get my legs more involved in the deadlift. And I'm also a very avid advocate of like, okay, people will ramp their eighth rep, and they'll be able to get it when they have no energy at all. That just tells me that ramping is more efficient because you can do it when when you have nothing left. So like in contests, I ramp from rep one, whether I need to or not. And I know that's not for everybody, but we got to play games with the deadlift because I gotta find points. And I think I've scored like I score points in deadlift where I shouldn't. I mean, I'd be like Arnold UK. I pulled a rep more than Bobby. Yeah, he was kind of sick and hurting. His max is at that time 100 plus pounds more than mine. I pulled one more rep than him at 770 because we ramp from rep one and play games and like figure out how to get everything out of the pull. So I just have to be. I got to play chess with the deadlift, and it's like the final piece I'll say. I've been rambling a lot is finding that max recoverable volume in certain lifts. I can't do a ton of direct back work or hip hinging work because my torso's 5 feet long, but I can do unlimited amounts of leg volume, right? The inverse is true with people who have super long legs and short torso. You give them tons of volume on squats. Guess what, coach? They're just using their back. Whether the squat looks good or not, their back is what's getting worked. Their legs aren't. They need single leg work. They need leg press. They need belt squat. They need stuff like that. It just tailoring the program to the leverages and what actually really produces stimulus.
That, I mean, all of that feels like I'm having a lot of my early years kind of repeated back to me. I mean, I have, my friends would make like humpback jokes or like, Quasimodo jokes because I have such a fat round of meat right on my mid back because from the time I was a teenager, before I knew any better, I mean, every deadlift was just mid back folded. And then it kind of became where it's like, you can't even label it as a deadlift stimulus because it's so like wormy and different than what it was before. And again, if you don't have a system in place that actually accounts for what is recoverable, what's a good enough stimulus rather than the greatest stimulus you could experience right now, you end up shooting yourself in the foot. Every time I would go to pull, I thought, oh, this has to be a hard, heavy pull. It has to be more than last time. And then eventually it's like the thing that's hanging on by a thread, which is everything that supports your torso, is the first thing to go. And it's like, it makes you want to blow your brains out. And then you add in strongman, which is like, that's the only thing you're being graded on.
Yeah.
And then, oh, by the way, you got to go stone load and do bag picks and do log cleans on top of that. I mean, I struggled for a lot of years getting around that. But I think a lot of this really does start to make more comprehensive sense when people get away from the idea that a training session needs to be something that is at your limit or that is by definition more than you've ever done before in order for it to be productive, because you can find your limit and work below that and get enough work in where it's a good stimulus, but you also reinforce good habits. But that's so counter to, I think, how so many people view training. So when I get the sense that you use the deadlift or very, very close deadlift variations as kind of the main driver of that. You're not going crazy with specialty bars and different banded setups or different positions. I mean, how do you tend to kind of arrange your main work that's focused on that pattern versus all the supplementary stuff that's supposed to kind of come in from behind?
So like further for the show, yes, we'll deadlift. But it's a lot of positional stuff. So like pause deadlifts, like we're not reinventing the wheel there because I just have to get my back able to hold positions. But like further from the show, we like things. The seated good morning has just been a staple in our system forever. I'm not good at a real good morning. I don't. It's not a good movement for me. But a seated SSB good morning done in the way that we like to do it. A axle stiff leg deadlift. Recently we had some conversations with JF Carone. And he really loved controlled eccentrics on deadlifts. So closer into the off season, we've been playing with controlled eccentrics. So just more time under tension, which is something we've really never played with in the deadlift. I really haven't done it. I mean, most of it, like kind of off season percentages. So like, I think the heaviest we got was 70%. But he would do it on really heavy pulls, and that's just something we haven't played with yet. And then in a peak, I know a lot of people don't like to. It's just like a huge divide. Do we compartmentalize our deadlift? Like if we suck at the top, do we rack pull or do we deficit? Right? We're a rack pull camp. Like I think rack pulling totally helps, especially being a guy who ramps intentionally. I can set up my exact ramping pattern I do the old school like belt squat rack pulls that like Shaw used to do. We'll do those during the peaking protocol. So we finish our main meat and potatoes deadlifts. We'll do a little more volume from elevated so I can get my torso angle high enough that I can recover from it. But now it has reached the point I think I spent so many years sucking off the floor that my off the floor has gotten good enough. And now I'll fail at lockout. So now we've shifted to let's do this top end work. And I don't know. We've done it we did it for UK. We did it for Strongest Man on Earth. And now we've done it a bit. We've pulled back in these last few weeks for the Arnold. We're not doing the rack pulls anymore just because I can't recover from it. And my deadlift is so much higher than what it was. Like, I think at Arnold UK, I could have pulled 850, 860. I am not afraid of a 950 pull in 3 weeks.
Wow.
Right? Like, so we've found what works for me. Like, that's not gospel, but I think we're on a good track with it.
I always run into this type of paradoxical thinking when I'm trying to arrange my work the same way. Like, what is going to be more recoverable so I can get stimulus without falling apart for the next workout? And the rationale goes very similarly. It's like, well, if I can stay a bit more upright, that's going to take away or lessen the impact of the thing that I'm fighting against that's like holding me back. So it's like, okay, maybe a trap bar, or maybe an elevated pull, or maybe even like kind of a modified like frog stance or something where I'm a little more upright. But then it feels like it very quickly turns where it's like, okay, but now the load's higher. So it's like, okay, is the better position allowing you to recover, or is the extra load, knocking your dick limp?
Mm-hmm.
And I find that it's like, I don't know until I do it, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And it's like this for us, or it's like maybe at the start it was better, but then I got good at it. And it's like, okay, this is back in that's going to blow my WOD camp. So it seems like you're finding things that work and recycling it, which is like, I think the best thing that anybody can do. But do you find that, do you have room to like experiment with new things, or are you just like very loyal to it worked last time, so let's run it again?
Well, so I have the luxury of time off because I only competed 4 times last year, like, and even then it didn't feel like I had time off because, we finish one show and we're, 12 weeks from the next one, we should start laying the groundwork. But what's great about Strongman is because, yes, I've peaked for deadlift 8 times with a similar system. I've had 8 different deadlift formats in shows. So whether that's Arnold Amateur was a Ukrainian deadlift for reps, I've had deadlift for max, I've had deadlift for reps elevated, I've had, all kinds of different things. So towards the end of that peak, it, shoots off and we go a little bit different. And what's kind of been nice is having this variety of deadlifts has kind of forced Alec to have, wheels turning with this specific end goal with this show, plus what was wrong with the last time. We kind of have just gotten to experiment. So it's kind of cool in this like 7 podium streak. We've had 7 different kinds of deadlifts. We've gotten to experiment 7 different ways. So we're kind of, we've actually, with this specific progression of squat deadlifts, we have this base and we have like 6 offshoots off of it that we know 4.5 of them work. Right. And it's just, I think having some long-term plan and relationship with the coach, like there's no replacement for it because nobody aside from like Thor and Sebastian have that much data. Like I bet they could give a pretty similar answer to what I just said, but like what coach and athlete have been together long enough to actually say that? Nobody. Right. There might be somebody that I'm not thinking of, but it might be just Thor and Sebastian, but me and Alec, 3.5 years of believing in a system and just tweaking, like it's pretty adaptable.
And the moral of that story to anybody listening is how absolutely important it is to take notes, make meaningful conclusions about the things you recognize in your training. And when you tweak, the tweak should be purposeful, not just like, hey, let's go try this other thing over here. And I deal with that. I don't know if it was the best thing I ever did or the biggest mistake I ever did. I made a Discord. Shout out to my Discord peeps. And I love it. It's a great community. There's a lot of cool engagement in there, but it also gives me supreme anxiety because it's just a stream of consciousness of everybody's. It's like the if in the Matrix, one of the computer programs that were like personified was just like the id of all strength training. It's like all of the random decision making. I had guys that said that they were going to try to do Smolov for all lifts all at the same time. Like this is the type of stuff they come up with. Yeah, let's just go for it, brother. And they love to get after it. They love to work, right? But it's like, I'm like, okay, to what point is it like you gotta, and let's not get into like joy doing it just because you enjoy it, so who cares? But if you want the best result, there's like this balance of you have your system
Mm-hmm.
and things have to be contained within there. But paying attention seems to be the one thing that so many people miss, because you can't pay attention if every time you try to apply it next time around, it's so different that you don't even know where the anchor points are.
Yeah.
I I want one more deadlift thing, and then we'll move on, because I'm beating the deadlift thing
Okay.
to the ground very selfishly, because I want to pull as much out of this as possible. You mentioned that you were weak off the floor, and obviously your legs are very strong. Was that in particular was that due in particularly to the difficulty you had either through your erectors or midsection or upper back in maintaining position? So it wasn't necessarily driving power; it was more supportive power.
So I think over the years I've conceptually rebuilt my deadlift like two or three different times. I don't think I like if you would have asked me 2 years ago, how do you pull slack off the floor? How do you create tension? How do you do all that stuff? I was more of I'm trying to be a traditional hip hinging deadlift, and it just was not how I'm built. And then once I figured out, okay, I need to be a little bit of a squattier deadlift. It was also in the same period of time where I got pretty fat, and I ruined, my belly's in the way of my knees, so I had to do kind of like a thin feet, wide knees, which has its time and a place, but Dan Bell's not setting world records like that. It's not the best way to pull, right? So it's just an evolution of styles and leverages over time, and then really once we kind of cracked that code of like the issue is the back can't hold positions. Now that we know we need to do a squattier style deadlift, once we laser focused on that one issue, I'm no longer weak off the floor, right? If the back can hold positions, I'm not weak off the floor. I think I could pull close to 1,000 to my knees at this point. I think I'm
Wow.
pretty confident in my pull off the floor. At Shaw, I failed 930 at 99% of lockout. The lockout pattern is where I'll fail at this point. And it's just because by design, if you just looked at my leverages, I should be, weaker off the floor. We've laser focused on it for 18 months to 2 years. Now that's the strong point. Now we got to laser focus somewhere else. And I bet at some point the off the floor is going to be the weak point again. So it's just, you know, evolving with
Yeah.
where you're weak and where you're strong. And it's so crazy to think that I might pull, 930 to 950 in a couple weeks, and that's weak.
Yeah, it doesn't make
At
any
least,
sense where things are going. Two more quick topics I want to get to, and you've been very gracious with your time. At the end, I want to save Arnold predictions. We'll go over the
sure.
Arnold really quick, but before that, I want to talk about the strongest man on earth. For two reasons. One,
Okay.
because I want to get your insight on the entire squat debacle, which you did extraordinarily well in, which is a testament to your squatting power. But before that, in again talking to Hooper about this, he specifically mentioned multiple times like this is like the hardest show he's ever done. That it was just so unbelievably heavy, it wrecked him, it destroyed him, and I'm feeling bad for the rest of the field, because if that guy in his shape with his
Mhm.
adaptability and on is getting wrecked, it's like, how the hell is anybody going to be left in the sport? What was your sense of that show as far as the weights, the difficulty, the injury risk?
You know, I what's kind of fun about that show is I love that Brian's just not afraid to make it too heavy. Uh, the podium was the only three guys that didn't zero an event. That's it. That's the only difference. Like I didn't do exceptional across 8 events. I just didn't zero one, and I got on the podium. He just made it that heavy. I'm of the like what's just the way I'm built, and maybe like a Trey Mitchell and Andrade probably feel the same way. I'm made for those kind of shows. Like if it's 10% heavier, great, let's do it. I'll be fine. But yeah, I was a wreck. But what was kind of it was just hard. I learned from it. But what was kind of refreshing with that show is at the end of it, I was like, I was 100% strong enough to hang and do good in the heaviest show maybe ever. My lungs just couldn't do it. Like anything that I did poorly on is because I couldn't breathe because it's Colorado and I was fat, right? So that's why I was dying. is just the lung demands of that kind of altitude. Plus, just I leaned way too hard into the strength and didn't come in as fit as I needed to. So I learned a lot from it. But I think me and Hooper were hurting a lot for very different reasons. Because I mean, at the end of the day, like I have bigger joints. Like the dudes with bigger joints, I'm sure when I do a certain movement, I hurt a lot less than somebody with smaller joints. And there's certain movements I've heard Hooper describe as being uncomfortable and painful, and like he hates them. I love those movements, but he's good at we're just built different. Like he has things he can do a ton of that I'll get destroyed if I do it. So I mean, he's a long limbed, shorter torso guy, so we couldn't be further from each other.
Yeah, that makes sense. The leverage is kind of determining what structures are going to get hit more, and when you just turn the intensity up to 1,000,
Yeah,
I'm sure people are going to feel it in wildly different places. I didn't even consider the altitude of it being in Colorado. That's just like one more
yeah,
fu to you guys.
yeah, dude. Bunch of
But
dudes with
also,
sleep apnea.
and then when you think the heaviest show on earth, you think, okay, it's not going to be very cardiovascular, but I noticed that I experienced, especially in the early days when you start at kind of an amateur level, and as you ratchet up, I think people by default think that, oh, your conditioning and athleticism and all these things get better, and that's why you can get through like a death medley or something and not die. And I remember how important it was that I actually got stronger so that the weights, the medleys or whatever at the same weight just didn't require as much energy, because when something's maximal and then you have to do it over and over, run to something else, that's a recipe for messing you up. So looking at something like the wheelbarrow to the arm over arm, I'm like feeling so bad, because so much of strongman at that level seems to be either a static movement that's really damn heavy, or a moving event that's like a break and it's a little more speed or a little more compact or shorter. And it's like, how long has it been since anybody in this field has done that type of medley with those weights at that effort? It's like, I'm surprised guys weren't getting rhabdo from it.
Hmm. Well, and what's interesting, like it only really exists in, I guess, Worlds. The one example at Worlds is they're now doing the 3-bag steeplechase, which is a nightmare zone. But the Arnold, Rogue, and Shaw are not afraid of 90-second, 2-minute, or 2.5-minute time limits. And people don't understand that. Like as an amateur or even like a pro, I don't think I had anything longer than 75 seconds. Maybe one 90-second event. Um, that arm over arm pull, wheelbarrow and arm over arm, I don't know if it was 90 seconds or 2 minutes. I don't think people understand how rough that is. I remember doing a pull, and I'm not good at arm over arm. It's funny, I had probably the lowest maximal pulling power. They were tracking our pulling power, but I just was the same pull 4 inches at a time over and over again. But I remember taking a pull and having the conscious thought is like, I can't keep doing this. And I could see the Jumbotron up there. I had 45 seconds left. And I was like, okay, I got to do these 4-inch pulls for 45 more seconds. And people don't even, like, I think they just think about it being the heaviest show ever. They don't even consider, like, we're basically running the 800 in track. You know what I mean? Like something crazy like that. And we weigh 300 to 400 pounds.
Yeah, when you're ranking the hardest things you could potentially do, there's always a time component. I mean,
Hmm.
heavy weight is a different kind of hard. It's like strain is hard, but it's
Yeah.
short and you can commit and once you get the metabolic stress, once your lungs start burning, and then psychologically the time duration. I mean, yeah, it's like doing a CrossFit workout like Fran or Isabel. It's just like 30
Hmm.
reps continuously. And yeah, especially if it's always the worst when you're very conditioned to strength and you're deconditioned to everything else, because your ability to incur this stress on your body is just so high. You can redline it more than anybody else can. And then you're like the least equipped to be able to recover. Like, knock on wood, I'm hoping that nobody has a cardiac event or something from some of this stuff. Cause it's scary
Yeah.
territory when it feels like you're suffocating and your hands are numb and whatever. But then in one of your recent videos, I mean, I don't want to say it's an easy fix, but conditioning tends to improve pretty quick if you prioritize it, especially on a timeline. Like I saw you doing an air bike into a log press. Is this a more kind of deliberate approach since that event you're taking to getting your conditioning on par?
Yeah, we've hit it pretty hard since like that was the real like kick in the teeth with strongest man on earth. Just like we are strong enough to do any task that we need to. We know how to get strong enough to do any task we need to, but we just need to get the lungs where they need to be. And also doing we've done stuff like the air bike into something for a lot of training. I think um, that's leaning into trusting that you're good at certain elements of an event, right? Like I could do dumbbell, stone press, log every single week. But what's really going to be the problem? I'm not going to ever fail the dumbbell or the stone press. I'm going to fail because my lungs aren't ready to go on the third and fourth rep at 4:30 on the log. So it's just like let's stress the lungs and the legs on the air bike. So it's just like it's not being. Yes, we've deliberately attacked cardio, but that specific thing you watch is like not being afraid to not do the whole event, but to just train the stimulus that's going to make you fail, right? Like what is a non-negotiable thing that like when it comes down to it, what's going to make you fail the event? Train that. You don't need to train the whole medley. Like people who are doing like bag drag for OSG every single week, I'm like that looks bad, and I
Yeah.
don't think that's the best strategy. You should do that a few times to learn it, but once you've done a lot of strongman shows and you have a good understanding, just get your lungs and your legs where they need to be, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, the your ability to improve the entire thing is not very high.
Really,
So you end up just incurring more stress without doing anything that's actually going to get you to level
mhm.
up. It seems like it's the equivalent of like, oh, I want to get better at baseball, so I'm just going to play baseball games as opposed
Yeah,
to breaking your training down and attacking things specifically. I want to pivot a little bit to the squat event.
sure.
It was great to watch for so many reasons, and part of it was the hate watch element. I love that Shaw goes really big with the events and that he wants these spectacles and he's investing in that. And then Shaw also seems to have a little bit of a neurotic component where he likes to micromanage certain things,
Hmm.
sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. But so you have this event for people that aren't familiar. The squat event came, it was 800 plus pounds on this. It looked like a scaffolding, kind of a Smith machine
Hmm.
squat setup. And they had you guys place your feet in the same spot and you couldn't move your feet. My understanding is the only weight you had in warm ups to find that out was like 200 pounds on your back to figure out
Yeah.
what your stance would be on this new apparatus. And then instead of doing what they've done in the past for depth, where you have somewhere to set the bar down that determines you've gotten low enough, or even just a judge saying, okay, you're deep enough. They measured your knee angle,
Yeah.
which I think is the first time that's ever been done to try to decide depth. So, anyways, this all led to some very surprising results. People squatting to not different depth, but their positioning looking different, high squats, lower squats, but also Hooper running away with it. You doing very well. You got 5. I think that took
Hmm.
second place. And then Thor, who was arguably the best squatter in the group, like having a terrible time. And other guys
Yeah.
like Andrade, I was talking to Andrade, and he's a monster squatter, and he's zeroed in it, I believe. So all that being said, just kind of walk us through your experience with that, what it felt
Sure.
like, just kind of your take on the event.
I don't. I understand how he reached the conclusion to do a 90-degree knee. I do. It's what they did on the leg press, and I think it makes more sense on the leg press. Um, and I think he was just worried about different leverages, different everything. Like just bodies are different, squats are different. So I think he's like, what is the one thing that'll be the same for everybody? And it really didn't end up that way. I would have loved. I don't. I've gone back and forth because he actually like it was kind of cool. He knew after the event that didn't go super well. All the guys went over to his house, and we just kind of brainstormed how would be a good way to do the squat. And I don't think that day anything was ever settled, but the wheels were turning. He wants to make it better, wants to make it cool. So I hope it comes back with maybe some adjustments in format. Because I think it has the potential to be really cool. Um, but yeah, I don't think that standard was a good one. Um, I just wouldn't do it that way. Um, but how it ended up, I think most people were pretty close to the same depth. I honestly think everyone was high. I think I
Oh
was
yeah,
high. I
completely.
think, yeah, no, I was totally like those, and it might just be a branding thing calling it a squat because if it's just a machine, people want to see what they think of as a squat. At the end of the day, it's a machine. and you could good morning it if you wanted to, right? It's like you just have to touch
Yeah.
the bottom. I don't know, man. I don't think, I'm not sure if anyone, like I haven't really dove too deep into it. At the end of the day, Hooper got 5 more reps than me. So I wasn't, if it was like 1 rep, I might have been like, okay, what did he do? Did he do something? I don't know, man. I think it just kind of is what it is with that 90-degree knee standard. It just set us up to be a lot of wildly different squats.
Yeah.
But I will say this, everyone that zeroed, when you watch them squat in training, they're a hip dominant squatter and they're bad at fighting this. On true maximal lifts, the guys that fail, their hips shoot back and they grind through it like that. Everyone that did that failed on the squat machine. Everyone. Like, I know Thor is the highest 1 rep max of all of us, but when it gets truly heavy, he does a little bit of this, and everyone that did that failed. The Westerwinski got a rep. He said he'd never squatted over 715 or 720 prior to the show, but he went to squat, his hip shot back, he noticed it, he wedged under, and he finished the rep. And it's just
Mhm.
like having some adaptability in your squat and like being a true like technician of the squat. Like, those are the guys that got reps. I mean, Hooper does do that when he squats, but I mean, he's Hooper, so.
The rules don't apply. Yeah, and he
No.
said, because I heard conflicting things. Like I heard Sebastian trying to talk about it right after and saying why he thinks Hooper did well in it, and he ended up guessing at like the opposite thing that Hooper actually said. Because I mean, the thing is with measuring the knee angle is if that's their position that they're measuring for where the bottom is for your squat, well, there's nothing to keep you from now having your knees back more or forward more. If you go into it, you can change that position,
Yeah.
which even though technically the displacement of the bar is the same, like you said, you could go into a good morning position, and Hooper relied on a lot of back strength, but also you talked about Hooper's positioning, shorter torso, which means there's a lot less torque. He has a monster deadlift. So the benefit of having your hips high and doing something that looked like, God, it was like a hand thigh lift position or something. It was like this bastardized. Anyways,
Yeah.
yeah, it ended up with so much variability, and I don't think people care ultimately as long as you can say that people are being tested evenly. I think people like to
Yeah.
know what the test is, and when you call something a squat, you see so many things that look different. Then people are like, I don't know how to feel about that. And I think it's an optics thing. And
Yeah.
I heard something interesting when Shaw was talking about it, because it's like, well, why not have just like a judge say, hey, you got depth or whatever, and people are on their high horse like, well, then it's just powerlifting, as if all of the other things that strongman brings in to test under the umbrella of strength sports, it's like for some reason if you do a squat with plates to depth, that's not counterculture enough or something, which I thought was very weird. I mean, you guys
Yeah.
deadlift with plates. It's like
I,
the
I yeah. I think I brought that up to a couple guys over that weekend, and I think I heard the same response from like Nick Best. I heard it from I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but a couple of the old school guys. They're like, then it's just powerlifting. I was like, so. I would love to see a squat with 3 judges at Rainier Classic. We hosted a max squat with just 3 judges, powerlifting style, walk it out. It was awesome. Like, I think the crowd would love to see some 1,000-pound squats go down in an 8 event contest. Who cares if it's 3 white lights or we're
nice.
touching the bottom of an apparatus and a little green light comes on? It's all just, as long as whatever standard we set is the same for everybody and it's easy to understand and the optics are good. People love heavy lifts, and that's the
Yes.
end of the conversation, right? Like,
I thought the squat, what they did it at the Arnold a year or two back. I think
mhm,
they had the squat to walks, and it
yeah,
was like out of a mono. And I thought that was a great event. And of course, there's always going to be people that complain, but all complaints aren't weighted the same. People know what a squat is. They're seeing the
mhm,
fact of it being plates or arbitrarily making it barrels or like putting rocks on and painting them pink and orange or whatever. The idea that that is what separates it from
mhm,
strongman or to powerlifting is kind of odd. And I do see this very there is this like social pressure to represent what strongman is, and it's based off this very weird intuition about the aesthetic, where it's the same reason axles persist. I hate axles. Axles are stupid. You're taking an overhead press and turning it into a grip event, and the result is guys tear their biceps because everybody has to do a mixed grip. But to do a barbell would be not strongman enough, which is the only reason the axle persists, even though it should have been phased out. I mean, you don't see a lot of tire flips anymore for the same reason. And to keep insisting on max axle clean so people do a mixed grip continental instead of just saying, here's a barbell, get it overhead, which is like the oldest example of old time strongman displays. I think it's weird that that's what people base their intuition off of. And I think if you changed it, people would be super receptive if they saw, like you said, people love heavy lifts. They especially love lifts they can relate to. They know what the scale is because they don't have to convert like, okay, that bar with those implements, that machine, that scaffolding, what is it really? I think that's a big asset, but that's just my rant on it.
But I get, dude, I totally get the counter argument though, because if you look at, I bet I don't know this, but I bet if you look at Shaw Classics YouTube, I bet the two highest viewed things is deadlift clips, which is standard bar, standard lift, and also Thor, right? And the car leg press. I bet the car leg press is the second most viewed thing because people outside of strongman are aware that happened and they brought it up to me, and it's just like Shaw is trying to make things larger than life, and there is that benefit to, making things quote unquote strongman bigger, larger than life. I mean, are we in the golden era of World's Strongest Man right now? No, we're not pulling, planes. We're not squatting the Playboy girl. You know what I mean? Like the golden era of World's Strongest Man is when they did all that crazy stuff. It was kind of dumb, but how many people love the 80s, 90s, late 70s of those events? It's because they were doing the crazy shit that Shaw's trying to do.
That's true. But at the same time, it's like the sports evolved where now participation drives a lot of the popularity. And I mean, we saw that because, when I started Strongman, Rogue didn't exist. You had to know a welder or rig up your best idea of how to do this event. My first log and yoke I got from this guy in Kentucky who had a MySpace page, and it was like the only guy doing it, right? So because you have all these participants now that use plate-loaded equipment, then what did you see? You saw Strongman Corps using plate-loaded equipment. You're seeing nationals and even really big shows where it's like, it's a yoke, but you think of yoke, you think of a car yoke, you think of the bale tote or something, not a Rogue yoke with a bunch of 45 stacked on it, but that's what we're using. And it is weird that Strongman was able to brand a plate-loaded deadlift as being a Strongman event. But if you transition that to a barbell squat or a bench press would be cool. We love watching NFL players in the combine bench 225 for reps. Everybody wants to know how much you bench, but there would be such massive blowback if you had all the events and then just a bench press event, which is like the prototypical test of strength that everybody can relate to. But it's the optics, and I don't know what makes it acceptable or not seems to be kind of made up as they go, which I think is funny. And I don't think there's a right answer, but
my weird little aside to the squat specifically, I will poke a little fun at some of the old school strongmen. I think there is this little bit of frustration of them losing traditional squat events to dudes that they perceived as weaker. Like some powerlifter that came out of nowhere, or like Lalas being all of 5'9", just destroying you in the squat, right? Like guys who have super strong legs beating all these guys that are just strong backs that kind of squat. I think just all the prototypical strongmen are just super strong back guys that honestly don't have that strong of quads. Force them to squat for real where they can't do some kind of manipulation. They probably think squats are hard.
I think you're absolutely right on that because the sport doesn't select for good squatters. If anything, it rewards people that put all of their eggs in the deadlift basket because that arguably for most people at least has the greatest carryover to other events. Log or overhead or whatever, that's one event, and getting your overhead better doesn't make you better at anything else. But if you get your deadlift better, you're going to get those points, and it's going to make loading and picking and everything else that much better. I think you can just credit that to promoters not prioritizing it. I think it'd be very easy to have a shift if promoters started putting it in more. But it also makes me wonder when people I hate using World's Strongest Man for references like, oh, so and so did a 750 for 15 reps, and I'm like, you have a sport that has some of the I was going to phrase that wrong. Worse squatters. Worse squatters than you would expect given the tasks at hand. And they spend so much time prioritizing this other thing. It's like, okay, I guess some of them are wearing suits or whatever, but it's like, how much incentive is there to have this group of non-squat specialists actually have that weight as advertised on their back? I would not be surprised if some of those numbers got fudged a bit given given the fact that these are not the strongest usually not the strongest squatters on the planet. Of course, there's some exceptions, but I don't want to make accusations of fake weights or anything. But
Sure.
we all know how easy it is to make a rounding error, and then people start repeating a number or whatever, and it's nobody took the time to actually weigh this big heavy implement that's really hard to weigh. So let's just call it what it is. I don't know. But I would like to see that kind of phase back in. I'm sure you would too. To see squatting be more of a staple.
Yes, I would.
Absolutely. Let's pull that. Make squatting a strongman staple. The last question, and I'll let you go. I just want to talk about the Arnold coming up. I was talking to Andrade at the gym. Fortunate enough to train at Heavy Metal, where him and Guardione trained, so I get to see some behind the scenes and talk to them a little bit about what's going on. We should be talking to them this week too. They're kind of the up and comers. They came up together on this like trajectory, which was really cool to see. And Andrade was saying that, and I agree with him. He's saying that this group at the Arnold seems to be a level up from groups we've seen in the past. It felt more like kind of the prime Arnold from maybe 8-10 years back. Thor being better, Z being present, Shaw being there. I want your take on if you get that sense. What kind of pressure that puts on you, and just some general predictions as far as where you think you're going to land, given the crazy talent that exists.
Sure. I think, honestly, aside from a couple years, I think almost every Arnold is, the perception is this is the best Arnold lineup, or a good Arnold lineup, or a great Arnold lineup. It's just what you get if you do a somewhat good job of picking the top 10 in the world. There were some weird years. Like, I actually liked it when they had the Arnold qualifying series, but that sometimes resulted in some guys that weren't in the top 10 strongest dudes in the world being in the Arnold. So there's give and take of like invite versus qualifier. But I think most years the guys perceive it as this is the strongest year, or the fans perceive it as the strongest year. Last year was supposed to be the strongest year, and it was a boring Arnold because a lot of the best dudes in the world really found a way to suck. Because a lot of shows are awesome on paper, but how often do 10 guys really show up? Almost never, right? Like 6 out of 10 guys beat themselves and 4 guys have a competition, right? It's because it's a hard thing to train for. It's a big ask on the body. For me though, like this is the, one of the biggest lineups I've gone against. I'm excited about it. Of all the shows I've done, this is as far as like, at the Strongest Man on Earth, they thought best case scenario, I get like 5th. This show, this is one I can confidently say, like, this is my best shot I've ever had at saying I can win of these major shows. And I still will admit that is really, really unlikely. I know that I could fall, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. I could have an awesome full weekend full of PRs and hit 5th. There's a great group of guys. Just depends how many guys actually show up for real. So, I don't know. I'm trying to set 6 PRs. I fully believe that if I do that, I'll end up 2nd or 3rd, maybe even 1st. Just depends. But Hooper, he is correct. He's kind of in a position where he has to lose. If he just does what he can, he'll win. He needs to lose on an event or two for a couple guys to come get him. And he's not invincible. He's not perfect. He does make mistakes. It can happen. We'll see. But yeah, he is the best strongman in the world right now, and he knows it.
He does know it. I shared a clip on Instagram, and it was full reference. It was chopped down to make it Instagram appropriate length, and it left a bit of context out. He's very measured and upfront about the fact that anybody can be caught sleeping, anybody can make a mistake. But what I get from him, and I think part of where that confidence comes from, aside from this is how the last 8 out of 9 events went against these same people. I don't tend to fall out of the top 3 on any event, which is like exponentially more important than like doing the Kielskowski where you win them all except one, and then you take second because all you need is one
Hmm.
bad event. So that consistency is there. But also, and I'm getting this from you as well, and who knows, maybe I'll talk to some of the other guys and find that this is more of a theme, but it seems like between you and him, you probably have two of the best athletes at actually preparing for an event
Hmm.
in a deliberate style. He seems to be, and again, he works with laws, but also has a very, very broad athletic background, and is very consistent in his training and peaking. But then you, not only with your background, but I mean, this seems like an art form or a science that you've mastered, which is
Hmm.
knowing exactly what the ask is, exactly where I am in relationship to it, and what I need to do to show up. So, given all that, do you kind of notice, I mean, without putting anybody on blast, you kind of notice a theme at this rank where a lot of guys are getting by because maybe a mix of height and talent and just kind of
Hmm.
raw strength or experience, as
Yes.
opposed to like I am just razor sharp on my prep?
Hmm. How it's just the biggest indicator is like who who almost never PRs at shows. That
Hmm.
just if you're PRing 4 weeks out and not doing it at the show, um, you're not good at peaking. You're just not. You're maybe flying too close to the sun too soon, and I think a lot of guys are so genetically gifted that they can get to a 900-pound deadlift without learning a damn thing, and that is so frustrating to me. Like I had to learn a lot to get to a 700-pound pull, right?
Hmm.
Like, now I'm not going to make the argument, oh, I have shit genetic, because I don't. I don't. I'm built to do this. I have very blessed in a lot of ways to do this sport, but not everybody started at the same starting position. Um, like, yeah, just the guys who are consistently getting on podiums are not always the strongest guy in every event. It's they are the best at consistently preparing and understanding that this preparation results in this performance. Like the argument is like Thor sucks at pressing now. Well, in the Arnold UK, Thor scored pretty damn good points in pressing against dudes who are better than him at pressing, but like him and Sebastian know how to peak and he'll get just enough, right? Like I'm more worried about people who have a coach with them in the back that's the same coach they had last year.
Hmm.
Like that's a dangerous combination. If you're flying by the hip and you're just changing things every show, I'm less inclined to be worried about you.
The the monsters that I see come in, and this goes back to what we said in the beginning. I mean, we talked about guys coming in young, some of them kind of hitting that quick plateau. It's like a different thing to look at Zadrunas in 2002, where he looked like Baby Huey, and then see the
Yeah.
transformation. And then as he seemed to steadily also get better over most of his career, as he continued to push records. And I mean, I think his deadlift was probably the best in the last like 4 or 5 years of competition, as opposed to like, but then there's some of these monsters here that have been around for 5, 6 years plus at the top level that seem like they haven't really gotten better at anything.
Hmm.
And they have their strong suits, but they also have these weaknesses that have persisted. I think of like Maxime has had like the most abysmal deadlift in strongman for like the last 5 years. And the same thing you could say, Kielskowski, not that bad, but struggled. It's been an issue for Stoltman, even though he's obviously way better, but that's the thing that's keeping him from being completely dominant. It is bizarre to think that you can function so high at this level of just uncharted territory,
Hmm.
off of intuition and just kind of doing what got you there,
Yeah.
without actually being able to know exactly what you have to do to keep leveling up.
Hmm. And the amount of pros, not necessarily the guys that are in this like Arnold tier, but like the amount of pros that have reached out to me for like technique advice, or they'll be like, "Will you consult me on the program that I wrote?" And I was like, "Why? Where does this come from? Where guys think I'm trying to be one of the strongest people on the planet, and the best person to teach me how to do that is me in my own head, a guy that has a day job and isn't a professional strength coach."
Hmm.
It's crazy. Like,
Yeah.
but people will get there based off of like just intuition and like beating their head against a wall with like some meathead, either whether it's themselves or their meathead coach. it's crazy, man. Like, go find an expert. Like, if you're a bad presser and you want your job to be a strongman, why do you not also have a weightlifting coach that you pay every month, that you go to his gym and do push press and split jerk and all that stuff? There are people out there that are good at the things you're bad at, and if this is your job and you're not willing to, like all those guys that are bad at deadlift, why are you not, like, with a world-class powerlifting coach yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
right? And consult with your coach that you have. Let's say you have one that you like, build your team and learn these things. Like, if it's so crazy that only 2 guys out of these 11 are split jerking on this behind the neck jerk event. It's like,
Yeah.
dude, it's your job to want to win. Why are you not learning this stuff? Like, because I don't know, there's this weird ego with that specific thing. They think that push pressing makes them stronger. I also have the biggest push press out of everybody as well, but I don't have to prove it.
Well, it's called the big jerk, right? So it's like
Yeah,
the
right.
biggest potential for weight is going to come from that. Um, yeah, completely. Yeah, I'm just never not baffled by this strange quality of like these stop gaps that come over somebody's career, where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
you'll get somebody who'll train in a 500-pound deadlift and they'll just lift that for the next 10 years, or you'll get somebody that'll get to a 950 and then 10, 12 years of competition, it'll never increase. So there's this assumption that if you were good enough to get from point A to point B, you must be able to
Yeah.
continue leveling up. And it doesn't work that way. It's like there's just enough tweaking, variation, commitment to a system that has to exist. It seems to pass a lot of people. And like I said earlier, that's why I'm excited to see coaching now become a thing, because you do have guys like,
Mm-hmm.
your coach, you have Laws and so on, that seems to be making that a staple. So you're going to get
Mm-hmm.
much more razor sharp peaked numbers. So kind of rounding out the Arnold predictions, we're talking about the big jerk. Let's start with that. Are we going to see a 600-pound jerk at the Arnold?
So I don't know. So it kind of just depends where I'm at in the show, right? If if Hooper is running away with the damn thing, I think it's actually, in that scenario, it's more likely that I take the moonshot for fun and go for 600. If we're close and I'm like, we're battling for the show, I am not going to take a moonshot press. I'm going to do 2.5 kilos more than the next guy, and I'm just going to take my 11 points and walk away. That being said, like, Singleton put up a 550. Hooper
Saw
has
that.
it in range. He just needs to figure it out. He definitely can put down the amount of power required to get it overhead. And also with something as finicky as a split jerk, you mess up one thing, I could miss, right? So, like, saying that talking like it's in the bag is a mistake right now. That being said, if I do what I know I can do, I should, I could probably win the event on my third, depending on what Hooper decides to pick. I bet it comes down to the fourth because he's smart. He's going to push it. He's going to find a way to make the fourth attempt where it matters. And he's going to go after me because of the previous event. He's more than likely going to beat me in the frame, barring catastrophe, right? So I don't know. I don't see a likely scenario where I have to push to 600. More than likely to be like 260 kilos, 265 kilo. I would love to go like 270 to 280 kilo just to see, because I want to know. Um, I think it's in range, like 270 maybe, like 275, 280 would be like I would need to hit it perfect. But I think 280, even in like weightlifting halls in Eastern Europe, like, I've never heard of a bigger weight press than 280. So I think that'd be a fun side quest to go
Oh,
on.
completely. I mean, people
Yeah.
would that'd be a thing people talk about for a long time. And your
Mm-hmm.
553, I mean, obviously when a jerk is executed properly, it looks effortless, but it
Yeah.
was like it was just butter. And the fact that you're comfortable
Yeah.
repping 500 for repeated reps, it's just really inspiring to see. Given that you work with an Olympic lifting coach or someone within that background,
Mm-hmm.
and that's obviously something you're good at and comfortable with. What do you think of Hooper's approach, his technique? I don't know whether to see it as something that works for him, so maybe that's the best route. But he seems to like keep his head back a lot, which kind of
Mm-hmm.
makes sense from the front. You see a lot more people doing that kind of layback press now on
Sure.
logs, where I don't think they did so much back in the day. But even when he jerks, he keeps it back a bit.
I don't like it. That's well. So I got to witness Rob Kearney's training because Rob was at Dungeon Strength for a time. Um, and I caught him post tricep tear, but I got to see how he trained, and he did that a little bit of a layback split jerk with a really turned back leg. And anyone who like knows the split jerk, that turned back leg is a bad idea. It's a straight leg. It puts that back knee at risk, and it puts all the weight on the front leg, and you miss lifts out front, which is the issue Hooper's running into right now. Um, but that lean back technique, I wholeheartedly believe that is the reason that Rob's tricep exploded, because you're going in a jerk, the bar goes weightless, right? In a push press, it doesn't go weightless. There's some tension into your heels slam down, some tension turns into max tension, and you press it out. With the jerk, you go no tension, and then you in a traditional jerk, the pressing that happens actually pushes your body down, and there's no tension until you land with locked out arms. But they're going no tension to, I'm going to try to lock out 480 or 500 pounds is a mistake. I know, there probably comes down to like how he was training leading up to it. There's a ton of factors. There's a million reasons why that injury happened to Rob, and it could have just been a freak accident, but that's my theory. And also, just on the pattern of split jerking, that lean back is not, if you want to hit maximal weight, it's not a good idea. And I think Cooper knows that. But because he competes so often, he doesn't have time to, like, I can't take a step back for 6 months and just take it all apart. But you do see it in his lighter stuff. He's getting better at getting the head through, getting the better back foot. He is training, but on the top end maximal lift, that's his still best technique. It's better than the correct technique. So he's going to keep doing it until the correct technique catches up. I wholeheartedly think like 6 months to a year from now, Hooper's split jerk is, if he keeps doing what he's doing and paying attention, he's going to get closer to a traditional like weightlifting split jerk. And that lean back is probably going to be a thing in the past. I hope if he keeps doing it, like, great, but I don't think it's the best idea.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Just for the position you need to be in. So for pressing to the front, I've noticed that changed a lot over the years. Log presses, a lot of guys are. I'm buddies with Nathan Goltree. He used to train at my gym when I had it out in Southern California. I was at his first strongman contest some years ago. And then I watched the disaster that happened when he was going for that 440. And he's always been that type of jump, lean back, and it's almost like an incline press. So you get the benefit of that that strength as long as you can handle leaning back with that amount of weight. And then, of course, the stress took out his patellar tendons, and then the rest is history. As a shift in technique, is that something that you like or you think is effective? Do you think it's a bit more person to person?
Person to person for sure. I think I joke around, but like every press modality is just a tool in the toolbox. The lean back press, a traditional good strict press, push press, split jerk, whatever. There's a time and place for every tool in the toolbox. That lean back press, if you can't do that, you can't press a block or a stone, right? But I understand why people reach that conclusion of being a good idea on something like the log, but it, I don't think for 99% of people it's the best idea. If you're a world-class strict presser with bad knees, go for it, right? But if you can improve your dip and drive, get your legs stronger, improve positions, do a traditional head through log press, and you in 6 months you probably won't be better than the version of you that decided to lean back, but in 18 months you're going to kick the shit out of the guy who decided to lean back. Because my dip and drive, like, I don't train strict press. I do have a respectable strict press, but it's like I can get 100 pounds more out of my legs a lot faster than get 100 pounds more out of my strict press. There isn't another 100 pounds to go in the strict press. I'm not interested in being Eddie Hall or Iron Bibby or Jacob Finnerty. And the guys who just think that, yeah, I'm just going to build up to a 440 strict press. It's like, unless you're those guys, have fun for the next 10 years trying to do that. But you could get a good dip and drive and get a 440 log easy. Not easy, but you know what I mean. Yeah. It's much easier to do it with the leg drive route than the lean back and strict pressing route. Because
And that's interesting to hear that from your perspective, given the breadth of training that you have behind you, because that's been a very noticeable shift. You see with the amateur Arnold, and you see with all the different weight classes with the women and people working with different coaches, there's certain things that seem to like glob on and that kind of become trendy. You see them repeated a lot in the
mhm,
culture. And I've definitely noticed it. And it's a deliberate thing you have to practice. It's not intuitive at all to jump a log up and then push yourself backwards.
yeah,
And you see how it's kind of almost a version of a jerk if you're quick with it. It reminds me of
sure.
the layback press the Soviets did back before they got rid of it. But that's definitely something I've noticed. So I've been curious what the guys that
Mhm.
have excelled at more traditional types of pressing thought about it. So,
Well,
um,
and I think the issue isn't that. I think it's most of the time it turns into, you said it's a jump up then a lean back. If pattern is your plan is to lean back, I bet your jump up is cut short.
yeah, that makes sense.
It's never a full like perfect dip and drive triple extension into a lean back. There is the exception athlete that can do that, and I've seen it, and it's gorgeous when it's done right. And I get why you'd want to do it. I still don't think it's the best. I really don't. Unless your name is Iron Bibby, I don't see it. Especially with just the absolute loads that super heavyweights are doing. You're never going to build your strict press to a place where that's the best idea.
That makes sense. I mean, I see that too. It's like having to prepare for the layback. There's a certain stability you need to brace yourself to
Hmm.
lean that you're never going to get that full extension as if you push press or even jerk. Even if you're doing like a little shallow push jerk, you can still really kind of yeet that jump
Hmm.
in a way that the layback won't. So I'm glad I asked you that because I was just like, oh, maybe the sport's evolved. This is just the thing everybody's
Hmm.
doing because it's so effective, as opposed to, okay, is this just trendy? So to wrap this thing up, just give me a ballpark prediction for the Arnold. Who do you think we're going to see in the top five?
Um, I'm fairly confident in this five. Not so confident on the order. Hooper, myself, Tom Stoltman, Trey, and Thor. I actually think I'm somewhat confident in that order. Actually, yeah, I'm actually pretty confident in that order. Um, but Trey and Thor both could replace me and Tom in the top two. I think Evan has the capacity to do it as well. Andrade has the capacity to do it as well. But that's how the Arnold always is. There's a lot. I mean, Max has the capacity to do it as well. I could be proven completely wrong. Those three guys on paper. I mean, Max has kicked the shit out of me before, right? Like,
Yeah.
I could be completely wrong, but based on what I'm seeing, I'm gonna lock those five in, um, and I could be completely wrong. We'll see.
All right.
I
Well,
could I could get seventh.
we will know in just a few weeks here. What's the Arnold? Is it March 1st or the end of February, the 28th?
Yeah, I think it's I get out there the 26th, and we compete that Friday, Saturday.
Okay, so we're just like 2.5, 3 weeks away, and
Hmm.
we will figure out if that order of placing holds up. No doubt that we're going to see some disgusting things from Lucas Hatton. Before we leave here, just tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, I believe it's Lucas.Hatton on Instagram, and the one we're really trying to grow is YouTube. So Hatton Strength. Um, I don't know, maybe we could link it down below, but yeah, Hatton Strength. Really trying to grow that channel. Sharing some informative stuff as often as possible and tracking my training. So it's been a lot of fun making it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Definitely check out the YouTube. There's a lot of great nuggets, and it really is entertaining to watch Lucas get after it with these very deliberate preps. Thank you, Lucas, so much for joining us today. I had a blast talking to you. I will see you in a couple weeks at the Arnold. I'll be there
Yep.
in the kiddie pool with some of the smaller broken athletes. But yeah, I look forward to seeing what you do on stage. Best of luck to the rest of your training.
Yeah, thank you, man. I appreciate you having me on.
You got it. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.